Hello and welcome back to another episode of the AIGA Design Podcast. My name is Lishan Huang, Senior Director of Learning and Programs here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. This season we are exploring the theme of design and performance.
I am Julia Donatello, a Design Competitions and Event Manager at AIGA.
I'm Ivan Boscariol, a public service designer and innovation specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank.
Ivan, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to learn more about you and your career so far, and particularly this intersection of international relations and design and weaving it all together. But why don't we just start with a little bit of your story of your career so far?
Thank you. And also thank you so much for inviting me to be part here. I don't have much of a linear career, so as you mentioned, like my bachelor was in international relations, but when I joined that course, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I know that I wanted in some capacity to work with public good, but didn't really know what that meant. So I took my time in college to explore different things. I was a volunteer teacher. I founded a local NGO. I did different things. After that, I went to work for a social innovation co-working space, Pact Hub. And there when I really started to see what are the possibilities to do to act collectively on public good. Then I started getting into design. I worked for a consultancy in public service design. And then did my master's in design for social innovation at SVA, where I studied under you on 2 classes edition. And then worked in consultancy, but always in the realm of public sector innovation and public policy, etc. And for the past 5 and something years, I have been working in the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, as part of our innovation business transformation team, which we work kind of as an internal team, which has the purpose to deliver, create, and deploy innovating solutions for both the IDB in itself, but also for governments in the region.
Wonderful.
Maybe when I say like that, it sounds linear, but that's just because I organized the sentence, but it's not at all.
Yeah. We'd love to dig more into like what the role of design is in your current role at the IDB. But just one follow-up question is like, what made you pivot into design from the international relations side?
Okay, so when I was doing international relations, I didn't really know what to do with the course. Like I learned a lot, but how to apply, etc., wasn't really the thing. But I always wanted to work with meaning. And while I was working at this co-working space, I organized a learning festival. We had several workshops, activities. And one of the workshops when I was organizing this festival, the workshop organizer asking me if there was any way to bring a street corn cart inside the space.
Interesting.
And I was like, what the hell? Like, what is that? But I got really curious because I wanted to take part in the workshop that had the street corn cart, which was a design workshop.
Yeah.
And participating there, I was like, wow, that's really aligned with how I think. Like, I really like to get to know the topic and understand the human factors and then go into creating. I'm very comfortable with testing and prototyping and getting things rough and figuring out by using them. And from that, it gave me a spark to start to really studying it for real. And that I started to see that there was this pathway of designing better solutions for public, for citizens through the design lenses. So it's, I don't think that it's a very unusual way of getting to the world, but that's how I went and never left it.
Great.
So interesting. Wow. That's a very interesting spark for sure. I'm curious to learn more about how do you perceive the role of design within the institution as like the IDB?
So I'm going to break down a little bit because it's interesting because like in Brazil, design means graphic design or having your living room well decorated. Like that's the common meanings of the design word. So there was a lot of different types of evangelizing or explaining how to do, especially in government. It was very foreign for a lot of people. When we go into the IDB, and then international settings with other languages, the verb design, to design something, is a very common verb. But they use it to design public policy or to design a project. And one of the challenges that we have is how do we bring a human-centered lens to the design that everybody's doing? And how do we bring a prototyping practice to what everybody's designing? Because everybody's a designer. If you cook, you're a designer, like in a general sense. But when you go into the discipline, there is this challenge. So what we have been doing is, in the beginning, going to smaller projects to prove the value, to prove the success, because it can sound very abstract for people. So we have been working on that. And what happens is that most of the people who work with my team, they want to work again because they see the value that we bring, not only as a team, but as a discipline. Like, okay, they really work on, they are really focused on having something that works and that people are going to use. They try to learn from it instead of just like sailing into the world and hoping it goes well. But it's a lot of going to the people and explaining, doing context explanations, but building rapport and building relationships with people that know. So that's kind of it. So now expanding a little bit more on the role in itself, that at least in our institution is been increasing, especially for digital topics. And the more and more we are seeing the value of doing more user research, doing more testing, and especially in a highly bureaucratic and complex organization like the IDB, there is a lot of value into aligning and combining the strengths of the right stakeholders at the right moment. So a lot of what we do is how can we get the IDB's right people or right areas to work together on something that they might not have been working before. So there's a lot of that in how we work, and it's appreciated.
I love how you brought a little bit of the struggle of understanding the role of design coming from a language point of view, right? Because
Yes.
I mean, I'm also Brazilian, so I resonate with what you're saying. And the way we speak about design here is a lot in English, is a lot about creating things, right? So it's all about starting from scratch and so on. So it applies to public policy or a project, and anything can be created. Therefore, anything can be designed. Yeah, so that's very interesting.
So it's like a broader definition of design in English versus in Portuguese. That's kind of what you're saying.
We don't have a specific word.
Yeah.
Because like
right.
The closest
you say
one to be like
design in English, right? Like design, like when you're talking about the noun.
The closest verb that we have would be to projetar, like to design a project or to craft a project, but it's not really it. So sometimes when I was teaching design courses or service design courses, I will sometimes translate as like thinking in projects in a human-centered way. Because one of the challenges that we have whenever working in institutions is the institutions always have its own jargon and language. And if you start bringing your own and they don't match, then it can get messy. So sometimes we need to, okay, how can I be specific about what I do without using words that might confuse people? Because you need to meet them where they are.
Sure.
And so you spoke a little bit about your career in terms of how you've evolved from service design and social innovation and now working at IDB. How do you perceive the main shifts in the agenda setting when we're talking about innovation? So thinking about when you started your career, how do you perceive the context now, and how do you think will be the main topics in the near future?
So if we look like 10 years back, it was really not much or abstract. But then started a couple of trends starting to emerge. Latin America, Caribbean, the US, and Europe as well, which was the one I'm more familiar with. One is that a lot of people were doing a lot of innovation, but they weren't seeing themselves as innovators, or they weren't calling themselves what they're doing as innovators. And that would generate a lot of frustration because like maybe they weren't recognized. So there was a lot of intent on doing awards and festivals and etc. to push for more innovation, but also to make people realize that maybe they are already doing it in a structured way, but they are doing it. So there was that trend. And there is also a strong trend on innovation labs from within structures. So there was the Mind Lab in Helsinki. There were other um, innovation labs happening in Brazil, etc. Some of them were very general and broad, like we do innovation for government. Those really struggle to keep up the momentum because when you do everything, it's kind of hard to understand what you guys do. Some of them were more focused. We are focused on digital government. We are focused on digital health. What I have been seeing moving in terms of governments is a focus on more focused labs and units because those can deliver more tangible value to their certain areas. So in Brazil, there's a great innovation lab in a hospital in Hospital das Clínicas. It's called Innova HC. They do a lot of open innovation on healthcare. In São Paulo, I've worked as part of a consultancy with the local innovation lab that was working on improving public management and public digital services. Over time, those that stayed longer were the ones more connected to digital aspects. Digital government, digitalization of services, or digital health, or whatever, because those types of interventions can be easily scaled towards government. And government is a lot about scale. So it's like you have to have something that can be implemented across the country. So that's something that I've been seeing happening. And sometimes there is a structure in a federal government that helps coordinate or send resources or support these smaller labs. And also there's a lot of innovation that just happens because someone inside some certain structure hires a consultancy or hires people that they want to do something great. When you go into the multilateral space, there are still lots of ways to grow in terms of innovation practice. If you look at UNICEF, they have this amazing innovation practice, which is a lot on testing things on some countries and then figuring out a way for them to scale across other UNICEF members. What we do in the ADB is that we are really focusing on unlocking potential in areas and solving complex challenges. So we kind of work, you could describe it as like an internal innovation studio agency or institution. And that's something that has been working really well because there is a strong value added of a team that is within the institution. People stay there for longer, they learn, they have skin in the game, you just don't want to deliver PowerPoint and get out. So there's that context. When I look into the future, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but a big question is how is generative AI is going to be used in other things. And it's going to be a challenge as well, not only because we don't know where the technology may lead us, but in governments and international institutions, sometimes there is a discrepancy of, there are some things that are very basic that needs to be solved. And there are teams talking about going to the next horizon without fixing some basic things. And that can make a discrepancy because the pain point of the people sometimes in organizing these basic structures, they might not get there. And that's something that everybody's figuring out. So I think that's one of the things. And yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, you've addressed like a lot of themes that are interesting that we can go into deeply. I mean, one was like just about like the how committed a team is, how long people stay in an organization, right?
Yeah.
And then you've also talked about scale and the need for that, the way that governments want scale. I guess maybe a way to refocus this conversation, we can come back to some of these themes, is focusing on like, what are some of the challenges you face in innovation? You've already started talking about some of them having to do with just the language part and explaining what design is and all of that. And I know that some of the details of your work are confidential, but in general, you know, what are some of the challenges you face kind of every day working in like just this innovation function in a large organization like the International Development Bank?
Yeah, so there are many. I think some of the things that we learned over time, one is always have what we call the problem owner on the project. We saw, not only on the DB, but I saw this before, sometimes there was something that people say like a secretary or a vice minister or whatever, they will say, this is super important, we're going to do it. It appears on the kickoff, never appears again.
Yeah.
And if the sponsor, the one who can make final decisions for the project, is not involved, is not giving you time, that means that this initiative is not a priority for this area for this person. There's other things that are happening. And that's very likely that whatever is created or designed, it's not going to be implemented. And that's sometimes really hard because the problem is real. You really want to solve it, but if you don't have the person dedicating time and share of mind, it's not going to happen. And it's something that is hard to deal with because the problem is real, but it's not going to work out this time. So in these moments, you can either go around and try to convince and create momentum for a certain initiative to happen, or you move on to something else. So a lot of projects that we've done that we're really proud of, it took us a really long time for somebody to trust to do something, another method of solving it. But that was worth it. Because if we did it in the beginning, it wouldn't really matter. So that's one of the challenges that we have. And another one is there's sometimes a lot of misconceptions of like what this team is here to do. I've seen a lot, not so much at ADB, but in previous works. Sometimes there's a fear, a trauma from past experiences that when somebody's coming to innovate on something, you're coming there to cut resources. You're coming there to disrupt everything, change, and make things worse, or just to save costs. And you need to make sure a lot of time, and the sponsorship is useful as well to have people communicate, but also build relationships that can enable you to build this trust and show, like, I'm not here, like, I don't have a mandate to fire anyone. I'm here to help you do a better job or do what you want to do better. And that's something that also needs to be considered. And sometimes there's just a matter of timing. Now going back to my IDB experience, the timing of these organizations is not the same as people who have worked in the private sector, for example. Some things take time. If you need some approvals, they take time. And it might happen that out of the blue, you need to do something for tomorrow. And that can be hard to manage because the needs of the project and the needs of the context, they might not match the time that you have or the timing that you need from people. So a way to address this is by having very strong commitments at the beginning of how we make decisions, what is the governance, what are the roles and responsibilities of each actor, of each project team, so that you can bring more agility to it. But these are some of the many challenges that we face on working in these large institutions. But there's also some advantages. I have an old boss that says that government is like a train. It's very slow to start moving, but when it starts, it's hard to stop. So it's like when a new initiative is underway and like everybody say like it's gonna happen. It might not happen the way you expected, but it's gonna happen. So there's an upside also on this large structure moving because it's like the downside is also the upside sometimes.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. As you said, that the importance of building trust with the teams that you're working with, but also making sure that the person or the team sponsoring is involved since the very beginning. And I understand that there is a lot of power dynamics in this relationship with all the teams, I'm sure. And for me, at times I see bureaucracy. You brought it earlier, very large and complex bureaucratic organization as IDB. At times, the idea of innovation might be in the opposite direction of bureaucracy. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this and how do you navigate working with innovation and playing this role and weaving the bureaucratic system that you are placed in IDB?
Yeah. So I would like to start by saying that bureaucracy is important. When I started on this line of work, sometimes I would see the bureaucracy as the enemy. But actually, there is a reason why some processes and structures are kind of fixed or hard to move. Because you want to keep them stable, you want to keep them working, you want to keep them delivering. They might not work as they could, but there's an importance to that. So sometimes the way that you need to think is what are the cracks that you can exploit or open up and enter and then work within it. are with it. So those are big challenges. And sometimes it's not that the bureaucracy doesn't want to innovate, but there's always a tension of whatever we have works, it functions. It may not deliver all the outcomes that are expected, but it functions. And there's a fear that if you change that, it might not function. So then that you need to enter with doing testing, prototyping, piloting in a very structured way. And when you go into an institution like the ADB, where it's full of people that are very smart and academic and looking into evaluations, you need to be able to prove things, not only say, oh yeah, people like it. You should have structure and method to show results, because you need to de-risk the conversation. So you either are working on something that is not essential as of now, or something that already has a mandate to change, or you need to prove that this change can be done in a sustainable and safe way later on. And then I make a call for everybody who fears bureaucracy or innovation. Like, actually, we need these people in institutions like this, because we need people who are bold and can like ask the tough questions and bring topics and challenge things, so that we can start building a healthier balance of stabilizing but also changing, innovating. So I think we need these people working with us. And also, as you start to work with a lot of people, you discover that like people want to do different things. They want to change, they want to design, they want to innovate, but they never had the chance to. Maybe they never had the method to, they never had the structure or how to do it. They were kind of lost. So many times, so many projects, I found people that were just waiting for the right moment to do something. And then when you have them, it's just so amazing, because they work with you and they sustain this later. So I was talking before about the powers sponsorship, but there's also this internal sponsorship within the team. People are like, oh, I really want to make this happen. And when I look back at projects that were successful in implementation, there was a lot of willingness built. And then building trust and getting to know people is key, because you find hidden talents, you find hidden gems, you find people who just want to do things, and now they're happy they can do it. And we cannot see a bureaucracy as a monolith, even though it looks like that from the outside. When you go inside, you see that it's not.
That's great. Yeah, I love your point of view in bringing the balance of the bureaucratic, but also the innovators and the risk takers, so they talk the same language and move forward. Yeah, that's a interesting point. And I'm also wondering if you
And
can
also
share with us. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. I might be picking on language, but something that we always need to do and try to do in our team is not to frame ourselves as innovators. Because we cannot be seen as different as the other people. Like that dichotomy, like we are people who are we have the same goal as you have. We just have a different way of working. And we want to learn from you, and we want you to learn from us. Because like there's even small details, like I go to work with a shirt. Like, why? Because like I'm not gonna go there all designy, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, stylish. I'm gonna look weird amongst the rest of the team. You need to meet them where they are and show that you're part of them. Like, everybody's the same team, everybody has the same goal, but we can work in a different way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about, and relating to our theme of performance as well, like the difference between being an in-house designer working in innovation versus in the agency world, where it's almost the opposite. Like, I remember at one of the agency jobs I worked at, like our boss actually said, like, part of what the clients are paying for is for you to be cooler than them, you know? And like, where they are explicitly looking for this kind of external disruption, or like explicitly want an energy that's very different from the internal culture, right? And so I think like both of these are valid strategies depending on the situation, but it's interesting that you identify the need to sort of show that you're on the same team with the kind of design work that you do.
Yeah, and you can bring the energy and the tone in so many different ways. One of the things that people comment after working with our teams, they're like, oh, it's so nice to work with you guys. Like the environment is free, people make jokes, we create, we're okay if things don't work out. So it's better to breach this wall by doing the work with them and showing them by the example on how work can be different, because you need to destroy barriers and not create ones, even though they might be silly.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting what you said now, because earlier you said the importance of sharing your knowledge in terms of methods and tools, but now you're also mentioning the importance of showing how you do it. So almost like sharing your knowledge as the way you work, right? Like the way you think, and
Yeah.
sharing and bringing everybody to the same page. So I think, yeah, that's a great point, especially when we're talking about how to perform as a designer, right? Like that's one important
Mm-hmm.
point. I'm also wanting to learn more. How does the innovation process itself work at IDB? So if you can share a little bit, I mean, you brought already the importance of having a sponsor in the beginning and having this trusted relationship since the very beginning. But I'm also curious if you can share a little bit of one project. If we know that you have a lot of your work is confidential, but if you can speak a little bit of one project that's from the beginning to the end, so we understand a little bit of how the role of your team, but also connecting with all the internal, I'm assuming internal and external stakeholders work in a local context, for example.
Got it. So we don't have one process. It really depends on the problem and the framing and the context. And also there are other teams doing innovation different types at the IDB. In terms of my team, let's say there are two core ways. One is whether we see that there are already existing solutions in the world or in the region that we could apply for a certain at a certain context, or if we need to create something for, like, there's nothing real and we need to create that, or nothing that fits enough. So in terms of looking elsewhere, because any large institutions, not only governments, not only multilateral banks, they can become very insular and inward looking, and always think that everything needs to be custom, everything needs to be new. So we do a lot of work with governments in the region. So a couple of years ago, we've worked with a government into finding technological solutions for water measurement that were more precise and cheaper than the ones that they previously had. So we helped it find and match a technology that increased quality and reduced cost. Like that's like the best case scenario. So that's something that we do. And sometimes we have to create. So when we have to create something, let me think of an example that I can share. I think I'm gonna give an internal and an external example. Like one something
Okay.
that we did for the bank itself and also for the region. So I'm gonna give also now two examples of moments where we had to create something using two different methods of working on it. One that we worked with some countries in the region was I wasn't personally a part of this project. It was a project that we are very proud of. We worked with different countries in the region to create better services for migrants, for especially undocumented migrants or migrants in process of documentation in the region, because sometimes they move amongst countries, or the services and the procedures that a migrant or alone or with his family needs to go through, they weren't clear, not only on the bureaucratic side, but also on helping them settle, helping them figure out how to work, etc. So that was done in a very kind of classical human-centered service design way, doing lots of user research, which was very challenging because it happened during lockdown, COVID, so it was a lot of online WhatsApp interviews and cultural probes, then going through code design phases, and then doing prototypes and pilots in different countries of the region. So that's a project that we're very proud of because it's a super important problem. There was a coalition of countries interested in doing that, and we managed to be part of it in different cycles and doing different types of work and up until the end. And also touch on a very sensible topic, which is not like is on how to manage this type of services. Then another, in a more internal cycle, we have been working a lot within the digital transformation initiative that the IDB have on how can we improve the way that we do our operations. So we've done a sequence of projects on development effectiveness, which is the science that to measure and assess and push for results that matters in the projects that we do as a development bank. We started with a team did a mapping of all of how the interconnections of the operative cycle of the IDB projects, digital tools, physical documents, Word documents, etc., the process, etc., that didn't exist before. So there was a lot of gains on just mapping this in a human-centered way. And that helped us to then frame a more transformative project, which was on how could we design a new development effectiveness policy framework for the IDB. And that's something that we designed together with a group of people. And this was something very interesting because usually in government we joke, if you want something not to be done or to be done badly, you call a working group. Everybody shames a little bit of their time, they comment, and then nothing really happens. And me and my team were like, no, this is going to be amazing. It's going to work. So we managed to design all these elements of this policy and definition of development effectiveness for the ADB with this group. And the feedback from people was like, wow, I don't remember participating in something that really participative before.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really rocket science, but it was very intentional. And that made all the difference. And then from the policy creation, we went into doing a sprint workshop based on the MESA method, where we convened people from the DB and from external side of the DB for a 5-week intensive sprint to create the concept for the new development effectiveness measuring tool for projects. And that is now under development as a digital tool and furthering the concept. So this is an internal case that we worked with different approaches on different times on the same topic with lots of the same people, but changing the tone and the scope over time, and we keep working on these topics as we go.
I love what you said, that it's not rocket science, but it's all about being very intentional about it. So also speaks about, the performance. And also you mentioned earlier about the language, right? Like not naming it as a working group changes a lot the way people approach a meeting or a project or an engagement session.
And you were mentioning like about this in performance. I remember way back when my first big project in public service design, we didn't do well the framing of the challenges and then working to create tangible results, things that people can understand, see the impact, measure, and etc. And I've seen a lot of design projects going very emotional, very touching, very inspiring, but then nothing really getting implemented, nothing really happening later. And I think that sometimes you have to look at things in a quantitative way, bring numbers, like look at it in a more structured perspective, because sometimes it's not our role to implement things, but we need to design things in a way that they are very implementable. And that takes practice and a lot of trial and error. And it's something that I look back and say, like, sometimes I think like, if I went back to that project like 10 years ago, it would be so different because of the intentionality, because of the focus on the concreteness, knowing when is an exploring moment, when is a defining moment. Because performance is not only delivering, performance is delivering something that can make a difference. And also organizing the work of your team, also that you can use everybody's superpower the best way and to get to something that is going to matter later.
Sure.
So, we've been talking about this a little bit already, about even just like translating design across different languages and different cultures. And so you're Brazilian originally. We're having this interview in English right now, but with your work, you work in Latin America and like Spanish speaking countries and contexts. And so with that, kind of these 3 languages and then more than 3 cultures, right? If we think about all of the countries in Latin America, how do you navigate these differences? And are there any challenges and examples that you could share with us?
Yeah, so that's something that I really love about working at ADB, because we are across all Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have also the Caribbean culture and all of these cultures. We also have French as a language. but it's only spoken in our region by all our members by Haiti. But yeah, like most of my days in Spanish, but I also sometimes do projects and have people on my team who are Brazilian. And there are areas in the bank that they decided to speak amongst themselves in English because they have many non-native Spanish speakers and they thought that was the best way for them to communicate. So there are days that it can be very confusing. Like I'm speaking to someone, I change language, I get mixed up. There's a lot of Spanglish and Portuñol and all those things that happen. But at least we're very patient about it because everybody's on the same boat, so we know how it works. And culturally, I always had this feeling when I wasn't working with IDBs, like in Brazil, we say that we are Latin Americans, but we don't consume a lot of Latin American culture, or we are not so much connected to some of the things as we should be or could be, and vice versa. And even though, like, I was an example that MTV had a Latin American Music Awards or something that didn't really feature Brazilian artists. And that's not by accident. There was this either it's because of language barriers or difference in the history of the countries. And then by being IDB, I've learned stuff like there is a soup, a Colombian soup called ajiaco, that is very similar to canja, which is a very traditional soup in Brazil. So we start to realize like there are more things in common than we thought we had. We have very similar dishes with different names, but we have very different things. So it has been very. Sometimes I fear that we might have cultural shocks, but overall, I love how much I learn about the other cultures, about other foods, and about other stuff. I know way more about literature and movies on Latin America and the Caribbean now because of that. And because of the way the IDB works, where everybody, especially in headquarters, that all the cultures are mixed, over time it created some type of IDB culture. So it's not so much like countries' cultures, but there is some degree of combining different things. But there are small touches that makes a difference. So our cafeteria always have Latin dishes or Caribbean dishes. So it's really good to, some days you eat something that's from your home country. Some days you just meet something new. Then I get to ask a colleague, like, what is this?
What is this? Yeah.
What is
like
this?
A literal melting pot.
It's a melting pot. And like, is this like a daily food or this like a weekend food? And they say, no, this is a weekend food. No, this is a grandma food. And then you start to learn more about the countries. And it's really nice. Something that I really like.
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
wonderful. It sounds really like you have your own culture at IDB in addition to all of these other cultures going on. Yeah, so as we're starting to wind down our time together, wanting to connect back to the performance theme of this season of the podcast, which we can interpret in different ways. And you've already touched upon some of these in terms of performing as a designer, trying to be kind of insider / outsider, trying to push, but also trying to go with the flow of some of this stuff. Talked about some of these challenges of translating design culture within a development bank or translating even design across different linguistic communities. And so do you have any final thoughts about performance and the role of that, or other definitions, other interpretations of this theme in your role?
It's very easy when you're doing an innovation project to get lost into producing deliverables more than focusing on what's really going to matter. And it's also very easy when you're doing innovation design work to really talk about what matters and not have anything concrete to show for it. And I think if there's some balance, it always should be painting toward the concrete, something that people can touch and use, or even destroy and hate, because then other conversations can happen. And then on that, looking now into performance and doing our work better, there's a lot about building the relationships and really understanding what's going to be important to either shift this conversation, move this strategically, make this implementable, change this interface or whatever. I had an old colleague that said that innovation was a contact sport. Because like you don't do it in a vacuum, you're always talking to people and touching base and showing like this can be done. or this is not, how does it work?
Yeah.
We did a project a couple of years ago where we really wanted to change an internal structure, an internal process. And then we designed this whole thing, interface or whatever, tested, people loved it. And then when we went to talk to the implementers, they went like, yeah, but our system can only be customized this, and that way. Everything that you're saying can be done, but it implicates a cost of X amount of $1,000, and we lose support from the parent, from the provider, if we change it as much. And because we didn't check those constraints beforehand, we lost so much time, so much energy. Why? Like if we had mentioned it before and got to know the constraints, then we could design within the constraints or propose to change those constraints. And we got stuck in a nowhere space regarding this particular interface. So getting to know people and also not be afraid to ask the hard questions or the questions that might demolish everything. Because sometimes you know what's really going to matter, what's really going to change, and then you can do it. And on the other side, especially in internal teams, as you gain legitimacy, you should always go for work that's really going to move the needle, and then look at a way to bring an agile mindset to be constantly delivering value to the stakeholders. Because another failure of that I see a lot that I've done in the past is doing this kind of big bang projects. Okay, we're gonna do research, we disappear for 2 months, we come back with a report. And then it can be very disaligned with where the company or the organization is. And then you go and you co-create with lots of people, but never showing the prototypes to the sponsor. Why? Like to be aware that the organization is always moving. And if you're not always in touch, you might lose track of what's happening. But also you cannot always constantly be in touch, otherwise you don't change.
Right.
So there's
Yeah,
this
again,
balance.
it's
Like you
that
need to,
this balance again. Yeah.
there's this balance, and there's no easy answer. But the extremes, they don't work. That's the main thing. And then when you go into performance, is how do you do that? And just a final thought, something that I've been applying a lot in my projects, it's how can we find the right people to participate in the projects? Because sometimes in consultancy or internal organizations or internal innovation teams, people might be assigned to your team because they are available, not because they were the right people for work on this. And when you have the right people, you can do work so much better. The convincing is different, the argumentation is different, the structure is different, the articulation, the creativity, everything flows in a different way because you have the right people, or you have the right talent, or you have the right perspective or the right experience. Because a lot of times you might be treading waters without really going nowhere because you're not working or interacting with the right person or the right area. And being very intentional about it and expressing why that is important, it really makes a difference and starts to shift culture. Because like we need to be the people who need to be there, or the areas that need to be there, or the technology that needs to be there, or the resource that need to be there, not just because it's available. And also not even do innovation just because the innovation team is available. Like intentionality is key to whatever we need to do.
That's great. And I'm assuming that it takes some time for you to have such clarity like you do now, right? Of how the
Oh yeah.
organization works, how to work with each team, and so on. So it's almost like in such a complex and large organization, you need some time to actually understand how to navigate and play your role as a designer slash innovator. I know you can't call yourself innovators, but in that way, yeah.
Yeah. It takes time. Sometimes there's a lot of like teamwork. Like I know some people, other people know some people, so like we complement each other a lot in the team. But also like you need to want to do that, and you need to like that. Because if you think that knowing the people and the organization and the stories and how things work is a chore, is a task, like that, like maybe that's not the best way for you, the best type of work for you to do. Like you need to enjoy weaving this web of relationships and areas and knowledge, because it can be very stressful. It can take a long time. It can lead nowhere. So you need to not only like the results, but like the process.
Yeah, that's very inspiring. So, based on your experience so far, where do you think are the biggest opportunities for social innovation in Latin America and the Caribbean in the mid or long term for in the future?
I think I'm going to split into public sector and non-government sector. So in public sector, I think there's a lot of opportunities in digitalization and scale. So it's something that you can leverage resources very well and do a lot with less. But there's a kind of a paradoxical way of looking at it, because the new technologies might be enabling us to do massive scaling in a personal way, because scaling is going to be easier, but also understanding what difference are in each city, in each territory, because a lot of innovation happens in the territory logic. And if you think of a way to create structures or services or policies where a territory can implement in their own way, it can be very powerful. So it's like, how do you create the meta design or the rules of engagement or services or the public spaces that can be somewhere standard across the country, but then each territory, each city can apply its flavor so that it happens locally. So because this enables a local team to not have to start from scratch. They have a structure, they have a history, they have resources, and they can do their own thing. So that's something that I can see. I see happening, and I hope it happens more. Because I don't want, like, it would be sad if the future of public sector innovation is Gen I for everything. I think there's a look into enabling community looking through technology or through mixed structures. When I look at the social, non-government or private sector, I think there should be a lot of focus, especially on like the organization that I see that are most successful are the ones that are very laser focused. Researchers are few. Great people are not enough. We don't have enough great people to work in organizations. So the more focused organizations are, the more they can do, and the more they can create coalitions. If you look at the funding space, I'm not the greatest expert, but like sometimes there are 3 foundations that have a similar goal. So there's 20% of overhead of people across this foundation. Like, why is this money all pulled together to do something bigger? But then there are also like these really small things. Like there are some institutions in Brazil that are focused on supporting children with disabilities. Like, that's something that you cannot scale through generative AI.
Right.
It's contact work with people working with kids with disabilities. But then they get specialized, and then they can get funding for that. So, and also, and again, like, I think sometimes the conversations, because they're cooler, because they're more scalable, we can talk about big things, but we should never lose focus, like how maybe we could do this type of small, super important work, either be more effective in funding or more effective into deploying this for more people. We cannot lose track of that because of scale, technology, like need to combine all of that.
Yeah, coming back to balance as a theme again, as you were saying, like scale was important, but also there's a need to focus in on this human element of things and
Yeah.
this community element of things. Julia, did you have something you wanted to add?
I thought it was very interesting what he said, and I think that's a trick, like it's very tough because it's a tricky place to be in terms of how to design and giving some type of structure to the local context, like your example, but also design in a way that allows some type of adaptability from their side. So then it's actually useful and easier for them to scale based on their own reality. So it's a little bit of a tricky place to be because you do want to offer some type of structure so they can scale, but not too structured that they can't design them a little bit their own way, right? So it's where in the
Yeah.
scale are you going to be in terms of when you're like in such a large organization, the headquarters, and you have to be like zoom in and zoom out all the time, right?
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our time together, Ivan, we like to ask about inspiration and also a call to action so you can send people to learn more about your work, your team's work. And so the first part of this is just where do you go for inspiration in general? And then can you give a specific recommendation? It could be a book, it could be a movie, a show, a specific piece of media. We're very open to different media here. And then finally, we'll post any links that you want to share in our show notes. But if there's anything about your team and your organization that you want to say on mic, on camera, you could take us out with that as well.
Yeah. So on the organization, I think the Inter-American Development Bank website is where you find things on our social media. And also I invite people from other types of work to come work with us, whether it's in the country office or in headquarters, because we need people who are very passionate and engaged about improving lives in the region. Like we need those. And if you're an engineer, if you're an accountant, if you are a public sector specialist, if you're a designer, there are so many ways to work with us, and we need people with drive, we need people with intensity, and so that's something that I would like to have and also promote. Regarding myself, like I'm really bad at putting my things in the world, so I need to post more on LinkedIn. Maybe you can follow me on LinkedIn, but maybe I should use this opportunity to show more stuff and talk more about that. So I have not much here.
But in
In
terms
terms of
yeah,
recommendation, I'm going to give two recommendations. So usually when I look for there's where I learn inspirations. I really like seeing how people do things really well. So if you go with me to a bar, I like to sit at the bar stool to see the bartender doing. If I go to a restaurant, like I like to see how the guy making the sandwich is doing it, because I pick up a trick with the spatula. Like I'm always doing that. I'm always interested in seeing how great people do great work. A while ago, I saw a documentary of one of my favorite games called Horizon Zero Dawn. It's a documentary by NoClip. And what's special about it? Like I went to watch it after watching the game, after playing the game. It's a company that were used to doing a certain type of game, and they decided at some point like, we need to do a new way of game because like we cannot doing the same thing anymore. And they do this way of like doing a crowdsourcing exercise with the whole team, and they change the internal structure of decision making on game design. Instead of being hierarchical, being three co-leads. So I went there to watch how this game that I like was made, and I ended up learning a lot about how to run a very complex project in a creative and meaningful way. So I recommend that documentary. And on books, one book that I really like, I recommend to everybody is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummelt. I think that's how you say his name. I like about it because it provides a very simple framework on what is meaningful and what isn't when doing strategy work. There's so much nonsense and smoke in strategy work, and he really goes down to things that matter and like saying a plan is not a strategy. A strategy is a framework for decision making. So it's very simple in how we frame things, and I think it's very powerful. Has a very powerful message.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing those insights, Ivan. It was really great spending this hour with you to learn more about your work and the context of design in a development bank context, which is something that is new to me and I'm sure to a lot of our listeners, and for those recommendations. So really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me and for letting me talk so much.
Love to talk more sometime, and it was really great to see you and catch up as well. And for our listeners, our viewers, thank you for tuning in. Catch us at AIGA Design, wherever you get your social media and your podcasts, and hope to see you at our design conference this year, October 9th through 11th in Los Angeles, California.
Oh,
I'm Lishan Huang. Yeah, see you next time.